Yeah, I think we're live and ready to go, so I'll just get us going quickly. My name is Steve Buick. I'm the Press Secretary to the Minister of Health, the Honourable Tyler Shandro. We'll hear first from MLA Jeremy Nixon, then from the Minister, and just by the way, for media, we have two department officials here available to answer questions as well. So I'll ask MLA Nixon to get us started.
Thank you for that, and I was honoured to be able to lead this review of Alberta's Tobacco and Smoking Reduction Act, which took place last fall, addressing the alarming rate of youth vaping that we were seeing across this province, and certainly it was a priority for this government to protect youth, and as well as a big priority for me. Equally, we are committed to protecting Albertans from the harms of tobacco and second-hand smoke. I wish to thank every Albertan who participated in this review. We had an overwhelming response, almost 10,000 Albertans who participated in the survey. We met with stakeholders across the board. We met with youth, we met with academics, small business owners, enforcement agencies, as well as health system providers and health advocates across the entire province. In a total, there was 41 consultation sessions that were held from Fort McMurray all the way down to Lethbridge and everywhere in between, where we heard firsthand the ideas and perspectives of Albertans on this important issue. We gathered feedback on the gaps and issues with the current legislation, and we made possible changes to reduce, or have proposed possible changes to reduce harms related to the use of tobacco and vaping products in our communities. While perspectives varied, although remarkably similar across the board, stakeholders and Albertans were definitely passionate about the issue, and we were very glad, they were very glad that our government had taken the time to examine this important issue and hear from them on it. Along with the input of Albertans and current evidence, the review looked closely at approaches other jurisdictions have taken. Recommendations were then developed to create the legislation that was tabled, will be tabled here today, which is Bill 19. There is a clear need for evidence-based action to protect youth from the harms of vaping, particularly around youth access to vaping products. So in conclusion, thank you again to Minister Shandro for the opportunity to lead this review and to hear from Albertans on this issue. And thank you for everybody who was able to participate both in the online surveys as well as the in-person forums that we were able to hold. This is obviously a very important discussion, so I was glad to be a part of it. And you can find a report on our findings at alberta.ca. I'd now like to welcome up Minister Shandro to talk a little bit about the legislation.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to be able to be here to speak to this important initiative that we actually anticipated to be able to introduce many months ago. Very proud to be here with MLA Jeremy Nixon. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for being a part of this review and leading it for this government. So today our government is introducing Bill 19, the Tobacco and Smoking Reduction Amendment Act, which, if passed, would further prevent and reduce the health harms of tobacco products and address the alarming rise in the use of vaping products, particularly among our youth. There has been a significant increase in the rate of vaping among youth over the past 5 years, and the previous government, unfortunately, did nothing to address it. Well, this is a priority for me, and it's a priority for our government. It's a priority for MLA Nixon, and quite frankly, it's a priority for many Albertans. But before I discuss some of the details of the proposed legislation, I want to acknowledge the hard work of MLA Jeremy Nixon, along with the department staff at Alberta Health for getting us to this point. And if you can imagine, the folks who are involved in this review are the public health officials, the very same folks who are involved in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so thank you very much. Although this was delayed a little bit, we intended for this to be announced earlier this spring. Thank you to the department for being able to still complete this work, and so we get to this point in June. Now, MLA Nixon led the government's review of the Tobacco and Smoking Reduction Act and presented me with his findings and his recommendations. That work has shaped this proposed legislation. What was made clear during the review was that strong action needs to be taken to address significant increases in youth vaping. Recent statistics indicate that about 1 in 3 10 to 12 students, 1 in 3 grade 10 to 12 students have used vaping products in the last 30 days. The review heard concern about this statistic expressed repeatedly from parents, from teachers, from health experts, and surprisingly from the youth themselves. No one fully knows yet all of the health harms from vaping, but the recent emergence of vaping-associated lung illnesses and deaths is a warning. Vaping is not a harmless behavior without short or long-term consequences, and that shouldn't be surprising. We know that lesson from smoking. We know that addiction to tobacco products is the leading cause of preventable illness, of disability, and death in Alberta, and yet the prevalence of smoking in Alberta is the second highest in our country. If this trend is allowed to continue, not only will there be a devastating cost to individuals and their families, but it'll also be a cost to our health system here in Alberta, approximately $6 billion over the next 4 years. And if those aren't enough reasons to address this issue, emerging research is demonstrating that smokers and vapers are more likely to experience severe symptoms if they contract COVID-19. Now, could not be a better time to help those who want to quit. And the proposed legislation is informed by evidence as well as the concerns, the insights, the expertise of thousands of Albertans who participated in the review of the current legislation. And I want to thank every Albertan who took the time to complete the online survey or attend one of the 41 consultations that were held across the province. Now is the time for Alberta to have the legislation that it needs to keep tobacco and vaping products out of the hands of our youth and the authority to enforce this action. For too long, Alberta has been the only province without provincial vaping legislation to govern the promotion, to govern the display and the sale, the possession or consumption of vaping products. As a result, there have been those who felt at ease purchasing and supplying these products for minors. The proposed legislation would change this. It would establish a minimum age of 18 years or older to purchase, to possess, or use vaping products, and this is consistent with smoking. We also heard the concerns of many educators and parents about the use of vaping products in public spaces, especially around schools and around playgrounds. The proposed legislation would, for the first time, prohibit the use of vape in places where children and youth are often present. And this includes schools, school grounds, playgrounds, public outdoor pools and splash pads, childcare properties, sports and playing fields, skateboard parks, bicycle parks, zoos, and outdoor theaters. Smoking will also be banned in these places. Aligning where smoking and vaping products cannot be used will reduce confusion for the public, but it will also reduce confusion for our law enforcement officers. And this will provide our municipal partners with a clear public health policy on which they can base their bylaws. And if passed, this legislation would further restrict the sale, the advertising, the display, and the promotion of vaping products to align with tobacco restrictions. Now that means there will be no more vaping displays above or behind the counter or anywhere in the store. Likewise, sale of these products in temporary facilities or vending machines would not be permissible. And as with tobacco, the sale of vaping products would not be allowed in public post-secondary institutions, health facilities, or stores where pharmacies are located. Now, having said that, we also recognize that there must be a balance between restricting the availability and promotion of vape products to our youth, while making them available to adult Albertans who are trying to quit smoking. The proposed amendments to the Tobacco and Smoking Reduction Act would therefore provide greater flexibility to display products within specialty vape shops where adult smokers can go, but minors would be prohibited. We heard from many Albertans that adult specialty vape shops play an important role in providing alternatives to those who are looking for ways to kick their smoking habit. These amendments would also establish penalties for vaping offenses, especially regarding youth, through fines for possession, fines for consumption, and consequences for those who choose to sell or give these products to minors. and these measures will be enforced. Now, I'd like to once again thank all the Albertans who advocated for this legislation. The bill balances the expectations of Albertans and interest groups with the economic interests and the advice of experts. It is the first legislation in Alberta to address vaping, and it's long overdue. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. Steve?
Yep. Thanks, operator. Do we have media on the line, please?
First question is Michelle Bellefontaine with CBC. Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, hi, Minister. Thanks for taking my call. The legislation, the amendments that are being proposed don't include a ban on flavored vaping products, though, yes, you do have that power under regulation if you choose to do so in the future. Nova Scotia has gone ahead and banned flavored vaping products on April 1st, and Ontario is looking at it. So why, if the goal is to make these products available for adults to quit smoking, why not just allow that tobacco and bland flavored vaping products available for these adults who want to quit, as they have done in Nova Scotia?
Well, thank you for that question, Michelle. And as you mentioned, the legislation does enable down the road for the ministry to develop regulations to deal with flavors, and that's something we will continue to look into. At this time, we're just very happy, especially because these are the public health officials who have been dealing with the pandemic. For us to be able to at least pass this legislation is really needed at this time, and for us to be able to deal with the flavor issue down the road.
Why aren't you dealing with it right now, though? I mean, you could be a leader in the country and outright ban it.
Well, precisely, as I said, these are the public health officials, the ministry, the public health folks who are involved in the review and the drafting of this legislation, and would be involved in to be able to develop recommendation for the regulations that involve flavors, are the same folks who are spending almost their entire day on battling COVID-19 and being able to deal with this response, the provincial response. So I've been asking a lot from these folks to be able to still have the legislation for the TSRA amendments to come in this session. I am thankful for them in accommodating that. But at this time, just with the bandwidth that the government has at this time for our public health folks, I think it's quite a bit for us to be asking them. And so what we will do as we continue with our relaunch, and a lot of the ministry folks, there's 600 folks who work in the ministry, a lot of them will be able to return to the regular course of business slowly over the next little while. And for the public health folks in particular, for that division to be able to put their minds to recommendations at that time when they have that ability.
Thanks, Michelle. We'll take the next question.
Next is Jonathan Muma of City News. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Good afternoon. You talked about flavor there. I was also wondering about packaging and more specifically nicotine. A lot of other provinces are either looking at or already have limited the amount of nicotine in these packages. Is that something that you looked at in this review or will be considering down the road, as well as the packaging to make it less attractive if this is targeted at youth, as you say?
Well, thank you for those two questions. First, I'll deal with the packaging. So the TSRA, this provincial legislation, deals with who can consume the product and where they can consume it. When it comes to the display, for example, if we were to compare with the restrictions on tobacco products, that is federal legislation. This is a situation where we do have an overlap in provincial legislation and federal legislation. And for example, when we come to the question of flavors, the federal government has imposed some restrictions on flavors as well. So this is an area where we do have an overlap in federal and provincial legislation. But the TSRA is legislation that deals with who consumes it and where can they consume it and who can sell it to them. I'm sorry, do you mind repeating the second question you had? The first one was about packaging. The other one was about?
Sorry. Second question was just about nicotine in Nova Scotia.
Levels, right.
20 milliliter in BC and Ontario. We're looking at that as well, wondering if there's anything about that here.
Thank you for that question. So that was reviewed. The federal government does have a limit at 66. We're at this time not going to be limiting it less than the federal limit. But the public health officials will obviously continue to monitor the situation and return to us if they think that there needs to be a reduction in what we have in our legislation here in Alberta.
Okay, thanks for
I guess
that.
my follow-up would be, why aren't you dropping it? Sorry, if I could just follow up on that real quick. Why are we leaving it at 66 right now?
So there's a little bit of feedback on the line, but the question was why not at this time? Yeah.
Sorry, my question is why aren't you dropping it down to 20 or a lower level? Why leave it at 66 for now?
So I'll let you go back on mute because there is a little bit too much feedback, but I think I got the question. The reason is because at this time, we just didn't, with the federal limit on at 66, at this time, we didn't see a need for a further reduction here in Alberta. I think there's lots of opportunities for there to be different products to be available to, whether it's the adults who are trying to cease smoking, or if is an adult who's making a choice for themselves. But at this time, we didn't see the evidence for there to be a limit at this time. However, the public health officials will, as I said, continue to monitor the situation and return to us if they think that the federal limit is too high and we need a reduction in the limit here in Alberta.
Thanks. Sorry for the feedback on the line. I think that was the question, and I think the Minister answered it. So we'll move to the next question, please.
Bill Kaufman, Calgary Herald. Go ahead, Bill.
Yes, Minister Shandro, is there anything you can tell us about a taxation regime for the nicotine vapes, or is that going to be consistent with existing conventional tobacco tax?
Thanks, Bill. I unfortunately can't at this time. I mean, this is the TSRA, the Tobacco Smoking and Reduction Act. This legislation doesn't deal with that. That is a question that could be addressed, though, to Minister Taves. But that's not really a question for me to answer and was not included in the amendments to the TSRA. But thank you, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. We can follow up on that. Next question, please.
Janet French, CBC. Go ahead, Janet.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. So, I mean, we can see in the lobbyist registry that there are several vaping companies that are, in fact, lobbying the Alberta government, and one of the messages that they are trying to convey is one that you're repeating here today, which is that vaping is a lower harm alternative to tobacco products. But you've said yourself that vaping has risks, so I'm just curious what government is doing to try and reduce the amount of vaping that adults are doing.
Well, thank you, Janet. Maybe I should also make it clear that during the review, I did not meet with any lobbyists that were involved in this file. That is not something that anybody that I met. So that would be news to me if somebody is registered to lobby on this file. But look, I think that when it comes to the safety of vaping products, I think there are concerns that some folks have. A lot of health experts, and right now the evidence is still being reviewed. And our public health folks are going to continue to monitor the various ways there might be adverse effects on the health of adults. I think that our government spends a significant amount of money in education and prevention and intervention programs, and we'll continue to make sure that money is spent not just on tobacco products but on vaping as well, so that adult Albertans, as they make those choices, are aware of the potential for adverse health effects.
Thanks, Janet. Next question, please.
Next is Fletcher Kent with Global News. Go ahead, Fletcher.
Hi, Minister. Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to expand a little bit on the flavored tobacco question from earlier, mentioning one of the reasons, or the reason that you're not moving forward with it is because of a concern for the officials, or health officials, about putting this through. Does that mean then that you are planning to move forward with a ban on flavors once the pandemic passes? And if not, what's holding you back from doing that?
Well, first, I would say this, that there is a need for various regulations to be coming forward, and those regulations will be developed. We have not made a decision regarding flavors at this time, I'm happy for the ministry to continue its work on developing the regulations that are going to be required and coming to us with a recommendation. If it includes flavors, it's not a direction from me, but I'm happy just to make sure that the regulations are going to be required, do get completed by this fall. And look, I think our public health folks will continue to monitor the situation, and if they think that there's a recommendation that needs to come forward, they'll bring it to my attention.
Just to follow up on that as well, are there any targets in terms of bringing down the youth vaping levels that you're going to be wanting to see when making those determinations about whether to expand the restrictions to on flavored to include flavors of vapes?
Well, for our youth in particular, that was your question?
Yeah, for the youth in particular. You were saying about a third of them are doing it right now.
Yeah.
Is the goal to bring those down to a certain number there in making that decision?
Well, I think while we do see that we are the second highest when it comes to tobacco use in the country here in Alberta, we have seen that the restrictions that we have on tobacco possession, use, consumption, and sale to youth in Alberta has had a positive effect in bringing those numbers down in Alberta. So my expectation is to compare those rates and to hopefully see that the youth vaping rates would be aligning with the reduction in tobacco use among our youth. And so that would be my expectations as we move along and we see how these amendments to the TSRA are, I guess, affecting tobacco use in our youth going forward.
Thanks for that. We'll take two more questions, please.
Lisa Johnson with Post Media. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I'm wondering about the levels of nicotine in some of these products. I know some public health interest groups have expressed concern over the sometimes high levels of nicotine, and this kind of restriction isn't part of the legislation, from what I understand. Is that something that the government will look at in the future, or was the business lobby in this case able to convince the government that it's not a good idea to restrict something like that so that adults can access, can make the transition from smoking to vaping?
So same answer as before. The federal government does have a limit. We are not including a further reduction from the federal limit here in this legislation, and it is something that the public health officials in the ministry will continue to review and to look at. And if they think that there are concerns with the current limit that's provided by the federal legislation, they think that there needs to be a further reduction here in Alberta, then they can bring that to our attention.
Thanks. We'll take one last question, please.
Final question is Tom Ross with 660 News. Go ahead, Tom.
I just have a question about the advertising rules. Is there any sort of grace period that's going to be offered for businesses? You know, are they expected to immediately remove all advertising and things in their shop as soon as the bill is passed?
So the good question. When the bill is passed, what it's going to say, if it is passed, I expect, is that it will come into force upon proclamation. And so we would expect proclamation to be this fall. So there would be a period of time for businesses to be aware of what our expectations are going to be of them and for them to align with the various measures, including display. But good question. Thank you, Tom.
So thanks very much. I'll have to cut it off there. It's a House day. We need to get back to the office and get ready to go into question period. But as always, reporters, please feel free to follow up with me and we'll get your questions answered. So thanks, Minister. Thanks, MLA Nixon.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.